The first word came so softly that Celeste Marlo thought grief had finally begun playing tricks on her. She stopped in the middle of the crowded hospital courtyard, one hand still gripping her phone while sunlight flashed across the glass towers surrounding her. A few feet away, her 7-year-old daughter was staring at a tired stranger sitting beside a little boy on a wooden bench. For almost 2 years, the child had not spoken, not to doctors, not to teachers, not even to her own mother. Yet now, with her small fingers curled around the strap of her yellow backpack, she looked at the stranger and whispered, "She sounds nice." The stranger's face went pale. Celeste's phone slipped from her hand and struck the pavement. Around them, people kept walking. Ambulances kept arriving. And the bright afternoon carried on as though a miracle had not just torn open the silence that had swallowed their family. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Echo Tales. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that can change a life when someone chooses not to walk away. Celeste was the chief executive officer of Marlo Biomed, one of the fastest-growing medical technology companies in the country. Her name appeared on business magazine covers. Her decisions affected thousands of employees, and investors waited anxiously for every sentence she spoke. In boardrooms, she was known for never hesitating. She could end a failing partnership in 3 minutes, negotiate a $0 million contract without blinking, and silence a crowded room with one raised hand. But none of that power had helped her daughter Juniper. 2 years earlier, Juniper had been laughing in the back seat of a car driven by Celeste's husband, Adrian, when a truck lost control on a rain-soaked highway. Celeste had been at an emergency meeting in another city. Adrian died before the ambulance arrived. Juniper survived with bruises, a broken wrist, and a silence so complete that it seemed to have sealed every door inside her. Specialists called it traumatic mutism. Therapists explained that Juniper's voice had not disappeared physically. It had retreated somewhere her fear could protect it. Celeste tried everything. She brought in child psychologists, speech therapists, art therapists, music teachers, and gentle tutors trained to work with grief. She rearranged the top floor of their home into a bright therapy space filled with paints, cushions, books, and instruments. Juniper listened. She followed instructions. She drew pictures, but she never spoke. At night, Celeste often sat beside her sleeping daughter and remembered how many times Juniper had once called for her from another room. "Mommy, come look. Mommy, listen to this. Mommy, I need you." Those memories had become both treasure and punishment. That afternoon at St. Catherine's Children's Hospital, Celeste had brought Juniper for another evaluation. The appointment had gone like all the others. The new doctor had been patient and kind. Juniper had nodded, pointed at pictures, and written short answers on a tablet, but no sound had crossed her lips. Celeste had walked out with another folder of recommendations and the same heavy emptiness pressing against her ribs. She was already taking a call from her executive assistant when Juniper slowed near the courtyard bench. The stranger sitting there was named Callum Voss. He was 38, broad-shouldered, unshaven, and dressed in a faded work shirt with a stitched patch from a heating and repair company that had closed months earlier. Beside him sat his 8-year-old son, Oren, whose left leg was wrapped in a blue cast from ankle to thigh. Callum held a paper cup of vending machine coffee in one hand and an old phone in the other. The phone speaker was cracked, making every recorded sound faint and rough. He had been playing a voice message from his late wife, Maria. And the recording, Maria's voice was warm and amused. She was telling Callum not to forget Oren's lunch and reminding him that their son hated apples unless they were cut into thin slices. The message was nearly 3 years old. Callum played it whenever Oren was frightened, especially during hospital visits. Mia had died from an aggressive illness when Oren was 5. Her voice was one of the few things the boy still remembered clearly. Juniper had heard it as she passed. She stopped, turned toward Callum, and listened. When the recording ended, Oren leaned against his father and asked him to play it again. Callum did. That was when Juniper whispered, "She sounds nice." The words were barely louder than the breeze, but Celeste heard them. Callum heard them. Oren heard them. Juniper seemed surprised by the sound herself. She brought one hand to her throat, her eyes widening. Celeste dropped to her knees so quickly that the sharp edge of the pavement tore through her stockings. She did not care. Tears rushed into her eyes as she reached toward Juniper. but stopped before touching her, terrified that one sudden movement might frighten the voice back into hiding. Juniper looked at Callum again. Her lips trembled. Then she whispered, "Is she your mommy?" Oren nodded slowly. He understood immediately that something unusual was happening. Children often recognize fragile moments before adults do. He shifted on the bench and held out the old phone. Juniper moved closer, each step hesitant until she stood beside him. Callum pressed play once more. Mia's recorded laughter floated through the damaged speaker, and Juniper listened with tears gathering along her lower lashes. Celeste remained frozen. For 2 years, she had spent fortunes searching for the key that might unlock her child's silence. It had not been hidden inside a treatment plan, an expensive clinic, or a research paper. It had been hidden in the ordinary voice of a mother reminding her family about lunch. When the message ended, Juniper spoke again. She said the voice reminded her of someone. Celeste's heart clenched. She knew exactly who. Adrian had recorded dozens of voice messages for Juniper. Bedtime stories when he traveled, silly songs while cooking breakfast, reminders to wear her helmet when riding her bicycle. But after the accident, Celeste had locked his phone in a drawer. She told herself she was protecting Juniper. Yet the truth was more complicated. Celeste had been unable to hear Adrienne's voice without losing control, so she had removed it from both their lives. Callum looked at Celeste and saw a polished woman in an expensive coat kneeling on the pavement with tears staining her face. He did not recognize her from business magazines. He only saw a mother who looked as frightened as he had felt during every hospital corridor he had walked with Oren. He lowered his voice and told her they did not have to do anything quickly. Juniper could listen as long as she wanted. There was no need to turn the moment into a test. Those words struck Celeste with unexpected force. Nearly everyone around her had treated Juniper's silence as a problem to solve. Charts measured progress. Experts documented setbacks. Celeste herself had turned recovery into a project with goals, timelines, and weekly reports. Callum, a stranger with worn boots and exhaustion in his eyes, was the first person to remind her that Juniper was not a broken system. She was a grieving child. Celeste sat on the bench across from him. Her abandoned phone continued buzzing on the pavement, but she ignored it. Juniper and Oren listened to Maya's message several more times. Each time, Juniper asked another small question. What was her name? Did she sing? Did she make pancakes? Oren answered honestly, sometimes smiling and sometimes staring down at his cast. He told her that his mother burned the first pancake every morning because she always made the pan too hot. He said she sang loudly, even though she forgot the words. He said she smelled like oranges and cinnamon. Then Juniper asked if Oren missed her. Oren said yes. Juniper looked toward Celeste, her face collapsing beneath the weight of words held too long. In a voice cracked with pain, she said, "I miss Daddy." Celeste pulled her daughter into her arms. Juniper began sobbing, not silently, as she had for 2 years, but with deep, shaking cries that seemed to come from the center of her small body. Celeste cried with her. People in the courtyard glanced toward them, but Callum shifted slightly to block the curious stares. Oren reached out and placed his hand on Juniper's backpack at it. Should have been the happiest moment of Celeste's life. Her daughter had spoken. Yet beneath the joy came a devastating realization. Juniper had not needed to forget her father to survive. She had needed permission to remember him without destroying her mother. Over the following weeks, Celeste returned to the hospital courtyard with Juniper every Tuesday afternoon. Oren's orthopedic appointments happened on the same day, and the children began to expect each other. Sometimes Juniper spoke only a few words. Sometimes she said nothing and listened while Oren described school, his cast, or the comic books he loved. Callum never pressured her. He brought snacks and cut the apples into thin slices, exactly as Maria had once instructed. Celeste learned pieces of his life gradually. Callum had been a skilled refrigeration technician until the company employing him collapsed without paying its workers. He had taken temporary jobs repairing restaurant freezers, apartment heaters, and grocery store cooling systems. Then Oren had fallen from a playground structure and fractured his leg badly enough to require surgery. Callum missed several jobs to care for him and was now behind on rent. He never asked Celeste for help. In fact, he seemed embarrassed whenever she offered to buy lunch. What surprised her most was the gentleness with which he carried his own hardship. He did not pretend everything was fine. He simply refused to let bitterness become the loudest voice in his son's life. When Oren grew frustrated with his crutches, Callum did not tell him to be strong. He sat beside him and admitted that some days were unfair. Then he helped him stand again. Juniper began speaking more at home. At first it was only to ask for water or request a particular book. Then one bright morning, while sunlight filled the kitchen, she asked Celeste why there were no photographs of Adrian downstairs anymore. Celeste looked around and realized she had quietly removed nearly every visible reminder of him. That weekend, they opened the boxes together. They placed photographs back on shelves, listened to Adrienne's recordings, and cried until the grief no longer felt like a locked room. Meanwhile, Celeste's company was facing a crisis. Marlo Biomedical had spent years developing a compact cooling system designed to protect temperature-sensitive medicines in rural clinics. The prototype repeatedly failed during extended heat tests. The engineering team blamed manufacturing defects. Investors were demanding that the project be abandoned. One afternoon, Callum arrived at the courtyard early and noticed technical diagrams sticking out of Celeste's folder. He apologized for looking, then pointed to a small valve in the refrigeration circuit. He explained that the design might work in a controlled laboratory, but would trap moisture during rapid temperature changes. His observation was simple, practical, and based on years spent repairing systems under real conditions. Celeste took the comment back to her engineers. At first, they dismissed it. Then they tested his theory. He was right. Within 10 days, Callum was invited to consult. He entered the company's headquarters wearing his only clean button-down shirt and carrying a notebook filled with hand-drawn diagrams. Some executives looked uncertain when they saw him. Celeste noticed. For years, she had claimed that her company valued talent. Yet, she suddenly saw how often polished credentials were used to decide who deserved to be heard. Callum did not speak like a corporate engineer, but he understood failure in ways their models did not. He knew how dust entered vents in old buildings, how power flickered in neglected neighborhoods, and how rushed workers made repairs with whatever parts were available. His suggestions transformed the prototype. The redesigned unit survived every test. Celeste offered him a permanent position leading field reliability. The salary was more than he had ever earned. Callum read the offer twice, then asked whether the company would consider apprenticeships for technicians without university degrees. He said there were people like him everywhere, skilled, experienced, and invisible because they had never been given the right title. Celeste agreed. The apprenticeship program became one of the company's most successful initiatives, but its first victory mattered most. Callum paid his overdue rent. Oren received proper rehabilitation, and Juniper gained a friend who understood that missing someone did not mean life had ended. Months later, Marlo Biomedical unveiled the finished cooling unit at an outdoor community health event held beneath a clear spring sky. The device would soon be delivered to clinics where unreliable electricity had ruined medicines for years. Reporters gathered around Celeste, expecting a speech about innovation and market growth. Instead, she invited Callum, Oren, and Juniper onto the stage. Celeste told the crowd that the project had been saved because someone outside the usual rooms had been listened to. Then she admitted that her family had been saved in much the same way. She said people often imagine miracles as loud, impossible events, but sometimes a miracle is simply a tired father replaying an old message for his son while a grieving child happens to walk past. Juniper stood beside her, holding a small card. Her hands shook. Celeste expected her to remain silent, and she would have been proud of her either way. But Juniper stepped toward the microphone. The crowd became still. She said her father used to tell her that kindness was a bridge people built without knowing who would need to cross it. She looked at Callum and Oren and said they had built one for her without even realizing it. Callum lowered his head as tears filled his eyes. Oren smiled and leaned against his father. Celeste placed one hand over her heart, understanding that her daughter's voice had not returned because the pain disappeared. It returned because she finally felt safe enough to carry both love and pain at the same time. Later that afternoon, after the reporters had left, the four of them sat together on the grass near the event tents. Juniper played another recording from Adrian's phone. In it, he was laughing while trying to make pancakes, insisting that the first one always belonged to the trash. Oren burst out laughing because Maria had said the same thing. For a moment, the voices of two people who had never met seemed to share the sunlight with them. Celeste looked at Callum and realized how close she had come to walking past that courtyard bench. One urgent call, one impatient command, one more minute spent staring at a screen, and she might have missed the moment that changed everything. Wealth had given her access to every expert she could find, but healing had arrived through a stranger who possessed almost nothing except patience, an old recording, and a heart that still knew how to make room for another person's grief. Callum had believed he was merely comforting his son. He had no idea that his kindness would restore a child's voice, open a mother's heart, revive a medical invention, and create opportunities for people whose abilities had long been ignored. That is the strange power of compassion. We rarely see how far it travels. A small act may leave our hands quietly, then return months later carrying lives we never knew we had touched. That if this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a meaningful comment, and subscribe to Echo Tales. Your support helps stories of compassion, courage, and second chances reach people who may be silently waiting for one reason to believe that life can still change. And before this story ends, please comment. Kindness gives people back their voice to honor every person whose pain has been misunderstood and every stranger who chose to listen. As the afternoon sun began to lower, Juniper ran ahead with Orin across the grass. Her laughter rose freely into the warm air. Celeste stood beside Callum and watched the children disappear behind a row of white tents before racing back into view. She no longer measured Juniper's recovery by the number of sentences she spoke. She measured it by moments like this: the way her daughter called out to her friend, by the way she laughed without guilt, and by the way Adriana's memory had become a source of love instead of fear. Juniper turned toward them and shouted for her mother to hurry. Celeste froze for only a second. Then she smiled, left everything she was carrying on the grass, and ran toward her daughter. I can also adjust this into a more suspenseful, more emotional, or more cinematic narration style.